usually if they don't receive them, they send me an email saying that can you resend it. It's okay.
Okay, that's fine. I'll leave you to it. Yes, it is in Norfolk. Thank you.
One Rice.
Good morning. Be seated, please. Mr. Setti.
Your Honour, I call Mr. Tom Phoebe.
Good morning, Mr. Phoebe. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, you will be affirming the list today. Can you please first confirm your name and position in the court's record?
Sorry, I missed that. There was some shuffling.
Okay, can you please confirm your name and your position for the court's record?
Tom Phoebe. Currently, I am Head of Client Management for the ASTA region.
Thank you. Please repeat after me. I affirm.
I affirm
To say nothing but the truth.
to say nothing but the truth.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Phoebe. Now, Mr. Phoebe, you're currently in Singapore, are you?
Correct.
Yes, and you're in a room I can see. Is there anybody else in the room with you?
There is no one in the room with me.
Thank
Judge.
you. I should have introduced myself. My name is Justice Martin. I'm the judge hearing this case. Mr. Setti, of course, is the lawyer for the bank. And shortly, Mr. Bickford Smith, who represents Mr. Mahmood, will ask you some questions. All right, Mr. Setti, back to you.
Mr. Phoebe, I understand you are appearing remotely from Singapore, is that right?
That's correct.
Could I ask you to turn to page 7683?
Yes.
We see a witness statement there with your name, comprising some 56 numbered paragraphs, ending on page 7698. Is that your signature, which appears after paragraph 56?
Yes, it is.
Is that the evidence which you wish to give to this court today?
It is. I have one small amendment,
Yes?
if you let me. On paragraph 19, the second line, there's the phrase credit approval.
Yes?
That should read country addendum.
So, do we replace the words credit approval with country addendum?
Correct. CA is the abbreviation for country addendum, credit approval. Otherwise, everything is correct.
Yes, thank you very much. If you remain there, there'll be some further questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Phoebe. As I mentioned, Mr. Bickford Smith will now have some questions for you. Mr. Bickford Smith.
Can I begin by clearing up some reporting lines in history? From 2017, you're Global Head of Compliance CIB Products and Segments, correct?
That's correct.
Based in Singapore, correct?
Correct.
Now, Mr. de Groot is the Regional Head of Compliance AME in Pakistan from 2015. Your reporting line was not into him, correct?
Zero reporting line to Manu, correct.
And you reported into Mr. Fanucci, is that correct?
Nick Fanucci, yes.
Now, you'd been based in Dubai from 2008 to 2014, correct?
Correct.
And you've been Regional Head of Wholesale Bank Compliance for AME in Dubai, correct? Based in Dubai.
That was my final position before relocation, yes.
You say that you were the principal compliance contact for the GIB team or unit. It's been referred to as both. The GIB unit, shall we call it, during that period, i.e. before
Correct.
you left.
Before I left.
And Mr. Long, you say effectively takes over from you.
There's a short period of handover, but yeah, he was in Singapore. He moved to Dubai, and I passed him on the way to Singapore. Yeah, so he took my old role.
Now, Mr. Akbar became the COO of the Islamic Banking Unit in 2012. You would have had first-hand experience of working with him.
I do not recall specifically dealing with Mr. Akbar. My points of contact with the then CEO and the product partners like Khurram Hilal that reported into the CEO.
And then CFK was Afaq Khan, is that correct?
Correct.
Suggest to you that the Islamic Banking Unit was not easy for control and support functions to deal with. Was that your experience or not?
Not my experience. Not in such broad terms.
Okay. Well, you say you'd worked with Mr. Vasselli as he was initially the other main compliance contact for the unit. He then takes on eventually a purely legal role, correct?
Mr. Vasselli, when I first joined, he was a derivative lawyer. He then assumed additional responsibility for Islamic, and as we were a legal and compliance function at that point, he would have been the legal partner to me as the compliance officer.
Were you aware that he had been shouted at and ganged up on in meetings by members of the unit?
I was not aware.
Can I take you, please, in the bundle to page... I should just ask you at this stage, have you got a separate copy of your statement, or have you just got the bundle?
If you see me looking here, this is my screen with the bundle. In the event that failed, I have a clean paper copy of my statement next to me, yeah.
Okay. You may end up using your paper copy to stop us going back and forth. So, hang on. Can you go to...
So if you reference the paragraphs in my statement, I can look at the paper copy.
Okay, perfect. Can you go, please, to page 970 of the bundle, please?
Yes.
Now, this is an email we'll be coming back to, but for other purposes. But can I just clarify on 971? You say there Islamic are a tough crowd, which I know from experience. This is at the very top of 971. So that was from your experience in the unit, correct? Of dealing with the unit.
Yes.
And in what way were they a tough crowd to deal with?
As neither a product nor a segment, nor at the time I was dealing with them, an established governance framework, they could be difficult at times, depending on transactions and products, around how they would fit into the bank's governance framework for products and for segments.
But I suggest to you also that what you're saying is that they were tough to deal with in the sense of being personally difficult as well.
I would not characterise it in that way.
On the Sharia reporting line, just to give you some paragraphs on your statement, this is paragraphs 13 through to 16. Now, it's not your fault, Mr. Phoebe, you appear on day 10. The court has heard quite extensive evidence about this. Can I focus on what you may have to add? Can I take you to 3672, please? Just to give you some context, this is a document from Mr. Vasselli. You'll see 3671. You'll see it's 10th. The date on the second page is 10th November 19. But what I'm I'm not going to it for lots of purposes. I'm just going to it for one reason. Issue number 5 here, it says, the issue of the conflict of interest and the change in the Sharia reporting line was first raised with the business approximately 5 years ago, before SM, that's Mr. Mahmood, joined Islamic banking. It was raised during my tenure as head of legal and compliance Islamic banking by the then head of DIFC compliance, Azra Ahmed, when he joined Islamic banking in 2017, etc., Mr. Mahmood, etc. So it goes on. So was this an issue that was raised by Azra Ahmed while you were there, or did you not cross over?
We did not cross over. I left the end of May 2014 and Azra had not joined at that point.
Okay. So you've given evidence on this. I just need to be brief about this. This reporting line was of a type not permitted in other jurisdictions, for example, Pakistan. It was not illegal under DIFC regulation, but it was not permitted in other jurisdictions, correct?
I was not aware of that.
And the BMA review conducted by Mr. Cuss, did you have any involvement with that? I haven't seen that you had an involvement with that, but I just need to ask you, did you have any involvement with the BMA review in 2019?
In the role I was in, I would have been present at its final presentation to CCIB management, but not in the formation of the report. Many other BMAs, but not this one.
And that concluded that the reporting line needed to change, and it's the bank's position that it then, in due course, did change, correct?
If you say so, I don't recall.
Okay, so, well, I don't want to put words in your mouth. Okay, well, I think in those circumstances, I'd simply put to you that the claimant wasn't the first person to raise this, and second, ultimately, the reporting line was changed.
I have no opinion on that, Mr. Bickford.
I'm grateful. We then go to paragraph 17 of your statement. For those, if there are people still on PDF, it's 7686, but it's paragraph 17 of your statement. And we have here 4 pages, 14 paragraphs about the what you call the HKMA disagreement. Can I take you back to 971? I said we'd go back there, and we will. And so here we are.
Yes.
Now, Mr. Cook emailed you about a disagreement between the claimant and Mr. Law, and that related to a cap on the amount of Islamic banking business in Hong Kong. Can I take you, please, to 933?
Yep. I'm there.
At the bottom, we have an email from Ali Arsan on the 19th of October 2016, and we can see that the Islamic banking business had tried to, it's over onto 934. It says, though we had progressed, and it's rather small text, but I hope you can read it, though we had progressed quite far last time in 2013 on internal CA, etc., but somehow never completed it. So it seems to have tailed off. This attempt to revive it begins in October 16. Then, if I can take you to 928. Coming close to the period we're looking at. Mr. Umer Shakil says, and he's emailing Lilian Koo, I've discussed this with the team. We expect the Islamic finance booking in SCB Hong Kong for each of the next 3 years to be around 375 to 400 million per year. And then we see, and this is really where the story picks up. So we go up to 928. Okay, let us take us to the HKMA. That's the regulator, effectively, yes?
Yes, correct.
And then we come to 926. I think there's a bit of padding. and this is right at the bottom of 926. So it's just before the email from Mr. Mahmood. Someone called Dennis Chan comes through to say, our HKMA case officer eventually replied to us, after discussing with the policy team and taking into account the planned volume, the case officer verbally confirmed that if we're just offering Islamic finance only, not including other Islamic products such as investment wealth management, there is no need to pre-clear it with them. Of course, as usual, he reminded us we should properly manage the risk, etc., and comply with all relevant and legal regulatory requirements. So there's no reference in that email from Mr. Chan to a cap at all. Is that correct?
Correct.
So then a transaction or a possible transaction emerges, and we see, and this was where Mr. Mahmood picks this up in January 18. A lot of work has been done to allow Hong Kong to become a booking centre for the group's Islamic business. So, just to put this simply, the Islamic banking has 31 locations, but only, I think it's 15 or 16 of them are booking centres. So this is about making Hong Kong one of the booking centres, correct? He says, he displays his final paragraph, whilst it's the weekend here in the UAE, I'd be happy to progress matters. And what he's trying to do, you'd agree, is to ask for an amendment of the CA to reflect the fact that they've already complied with the HKMA requirement. You'd accept that this is a perfectly polite and inoffensive email, wouldn't you? Please do read it.
Are we talking about the email at 924 here, Mr.
No,
Bickerton?
we're talking about the one at 926. We're at 926 at the moment.
Correct.
Now, there are several emails over the following days, so we can see this. It goes up, we see above, Mr. Lamb copies in Mr. Law. That's, I believe, at the bottom of 925. Mr. Mahmood says, I've tried calling you a couple of times, unable to get through. I'd be grateful if you could revert with a confirmation. I mean, the background to this is that there's an attempt to get an actual transaction moving. And then we have Mr. Law, I'm late to the game. Tentatively, I think we can remove reference, so that seems promising. You'd agree on January the 29th? That's on 925, hopefully, at the top of your email, top of the page.
Yep. Agreed.
Then I think you'd got to 924, so you were ahead of us. I'll speed up. Thank you for reverting, Harris. From a compliance standpoint, this is the only item. This is outstanding for this CA. And you see his email there. And again, my question to you is quite simply, it's a perfectly polite and inoffensive email, correct?
Correct.
Then we see that on the 30th of January, Mr. Law has made an amendment. And again, up the page, and now on to 923. Please see the attached amendment, looks fine to me. Then we go off into an internal exchange, which I'm not going to trouble you with. And when we pick it up, I think the best place to pick it up is 936. And sorry, if you go maybe pick it up at 937.
Yep.
I mean, I don't want to, Mr. Phoebe, you to sort of feel that you haven't had the opportunity to read these chains, but they do go on for a very, very long way. But if you want to read down to 937, 938, please do feel. I mean, I should take you through them briefly. So we have at the bottom of 939, this is an internal email really within the unit. And you see there that Sabir Ahmed, this is 939 to 40, is making a complaint to Mr. Mahmood that this is the effective cap, so that's really where the word cap seems to have come from. And then he's effectively saying to Mr. Mahmood, please progress with this. Then Mr. Umair Shakil comes in to say, I think that's an internal email, but again, what you can see that what Mr. Umair Shakil wants to get rid of is the cap. So the conversation around a certain cap falls away. Yeah, I hope you're following this, Ms. Few. I hope I'm not.
I am. I've read them at the time, and I've read them.
Good. Well,
it's
okay.
effective.
Well, that saves us time, Mr. Phoebe. So, can I just put it this way? We go up this chain. There's a debate about the cap, which resumes between Mr. Mahmood and Mr. Law. So 938. I'll deal with the easy items first. You'd agree that all of this is, completely. I think a phrase that's been used by other witnesses is BAU, business as usual, correct?
Correct.
And
I would have had dozens of these going on at any one time
exactly.
around the world.
So this is, if I can use the word BAU. So it all proceeds on. Then we see in the middle of 937, Mr. Mahmood says, can you please let me know when you have free to have a quick chat, as it may be easier to iron out some of the questions relating to this CA piece over this CA over the phone. So again, you'd agree that what Mr. Mahmood is trying to do is to effectively reach a solution, correct?
Correct.
And then we start to see problems at 937 because Mr. Law says, I've looked at the recent presentation of international booking. It seems they don't have much more capacity to accommodate new big loans. So, that doesn't seem really to be a compliance issue at all. It's a business capacity issue, agreed? This is 937, email down from Harris Law, February the 2nd.
Okay, so Harris has been looking at the IBD. Yep, understood.
And he's trying to stick to the cap. And then he's also basically saying the business should touch base with IBD to see, whether they can actually accommodate these deals, correct?
Correct.
But you'd agree that that isn't a compliance issue. I mean, it's not an obvious compliance issue anyway.
No, which is why Harris points to business to talk to business and not use compliance to make the decision.
Then Mr. Mahmood reverts, and we can see this is quite a long email, but essentially his first point, this is at 936, I'd like us to consider the compliance position we find ourselves in. We originally raised the cap of approximately 400 million in the context of the activity falling within their definition of outsourcing. We've established that the activity doesn't fall within the scope of outsourcing, and hence the discussion around a cap on this issue falls away. Now, there are some technical points. Mr. Law, and effectively he's asking to have a go at approaching the HKMA. Mr. Law then comes back at 935 to 936, 7th of February. And do you see the third paragraph down there? I mean, well, let's begin with the start. Question only, can you tell me who in the international booking desk has agreed to accept offshore Islamic loan? I spoke to desk head Jennifer Chow, and her understanding is that IBD does not have a mandate to accept Islamic loan in the near future. There was some hands change at the desk, so I want to make sure I consult the right person. So point number one, he's calling into question whether this deal can actually go ahead at all, correct?
I don't want to put words into Harris's mouth.
You can see.
I can read it. Yeah. I can see what he wrote.
And then he says, and then I'd suggest to you that by the time we get down to the third paragraph, Mr. Law is being pretty rude, isn't he? Or borderline rude, do you agree?
I wouldn't agree. I would say, if you look at Shiraz's... Sorry, there's a lot of noise in the background.
Is it at our end or at your end?
Your end. I would say point 4 in Shiraz's preceding email, where he starts talking about values and integrity being a determinant of what Harris is saying, where he says we need to ensure fair treatment and do the right thing, is a passive-aggressive way of calling into question why Hong Kong is making a determination they need to go to the HKMA. And that starts to make Harris respond to that point that he makes around fair treatment and doing the right thing, which are some of the bank's valued behaviours, as you've probably heard.
Yeah, but...
And I also think Harris would be saying, as you yourself just said, Mr. Bickford-Smith, this is a business decision and discussion, not a compliance-to-compliance one, unless we agreed we needed to go back to the regulator, which is completely a country decision, given they own the risk around their own balance sheet.
And at 9:35, the emails continue. Mr. Mahmood asks Mr. Law in an email just sent to Mr. Law, right, saying, you know, can I have a conversation about your email? Mr. Mahmood is uncomfortable about some of the contents of Mr. Law's email that we've just been looking at. There's a reference there to later they seem not to speak, it appears. I don't know whether they do, but let's look at 975, please. This is it's in Chinese characters, but you can see at 975 that email on the lower half is the 11th of February. It says Mr. Ma, he's making some suggestions of proposed amendments, so they have spoken last week. He's making some suggested amendments. And then we see Mr. Law's reply at 974. If the 400 million threshold is not mentioned here, who is to monitor compliance? Has HKIBD agreed to put controls around it, for example? Frankly, I still do not understand why we refrain from putting that in the CAF, the determination to make this known to people running the business and to follow it. The emails below from Sabir, do you remember those are the ones from Sabir in the business unit, indicate the intent to book big tickets. Do you have the same reading? And then it says, I'm in full day meetings today and tomorrow as well. We'll speak to HKIBD to see if they're able to monitor it, but the things don't really add up. I mean, you'd accept that that's a pretty dismissive email, isn't it?
No, I wouldn't accept that characterisation.
And you'd also...
I think they're valid questions that if I was a country compliance officer responding to where, I think earlier you referenced the Islamic business proposing 375 to 400 mil as the size of the transactions they'd be booking onto that balance sheet. That seems reasonable to me.
And but crucially, Mr. Law, you see, has chosen to copy in two people into his email, yeah? Dennis Chan and Yemi Hoyam Chan, correct?
Yeah, they're two junior members of the, or more junior members of the regulatory compliance team who would have been responsible for the HKMA interaction, whereas Harris was the product and segment lead.
And then we go further up, and Mr. Law has copied in yet more people. Sorry, Mr. Mahmood comes back. He makes the point that no one can randomly book business into Hong Kong or any other jurisdiction without going through IBSM. IBSM will liaise with IBD and OBLs to ensure the booking centre has the capacity. All of this is clearly documented and should be aware of it. We then see Mr. Law on 973 to 974 copying in yet more people, including Mr. Cook, correct?
Correct.
And he ends by giving an unequivocal answer. We'll wrap up the CALRN, that's the document, with clear reference to the 400 million cap. So he's simply saying, that's it, that's what we're doing, correct? 974.
That's what he's written. Yep, that's what he's written there. Yeah, Andrew is the country head of compliance in Hong Kong and would have been the regulated person with
Now,
the HKMA.
The propositions I want to put to you are, first, what Mr. Mahmood has said in his emails is perfectly reasonable. And second, it is in fact Mr. Law who has been expanding the chain, including with Mr. Cook, who you would accept is a senior compliance officer, correct?
Yeah, Joe was responsible for the regional CCIB compliance, correct.
And then we see that Mr. Mahmood emails Mr. Cook and Chris O'Donnell with his take on this, correct? Now, his evidence was that by this stage there was a degree of frustration on his side. Looking at the chain that we've looked at, isn't that frustration understandable?
I would agree there's a clear professional disagreement here, correct.
But the wider point is that we've seen in these email chains, there have been attempts ongoing since 2013 to get Hong Kong set up as a booking centre for Islamic banking. It seemed to be progressing, and then when there's actually a transaction in the offing, two things are said. First, are we sure the unit is actually going to take it on? And second, we're going to put in a cap in the CA, correct?
You use the word cap. I think the Islamic business used the word effective cap. What Harris wants to put into the country addendum, which is where you set out the country requirements for the product to be delivered, that they had agreed the facility would be below a 400 million level with the HKMA. And any movement above that limit, Mr. Bickford-Smith, go back to the HKMA.
And Mr. Mahmood tries raising this with Mr. Cook, and Mr. Cook's reaction is the subject of your evidence in part. Now, the court is very familiar by now with 971 and 972, and indeed 970. The point I make to you here is this. Mr. Cook mounts a vigorous defence of Mr. Law as one of his reports, correct?
Yeah, but we know why. Because of one particular part of that email on page 973.
Which is the reference to speak up, correct?
To speak up, yeah, which significantly changes the tone of the professional disagreement.
And what Mr. Cook is saying at 972 is sorry, is it 972? Yes, it is. So we have Mr. Cook then emails Mr. O'Donnell with no one in copy, and he's picked up on the seriousness and tone of implications of Shiraz's email. I get the impression that HK compliance is generally getting a reputation for business prevention. I'm concerned that this email is jumping on the bandwagon of that narrative. Would you agree that there's no evidence here that Mr. Mahmood was even aware of a narrative about Hong Kong compliance being obstructive, was he?
I'm not Joel, but I would agree I saw nothing from Shiraz's emails that suggested he was jumping on any perceived bandwagon.
And then he says, I'm torn between... so he emails you then, let's save time, he emails you. From the start of his email, we can see you're friends, correct, with Mr. Cook? Close colleagues and friends, correct?
Just to clarify, we have been colleagues since virtually our first day at the bank, and I would consider him a work friend, not a close friend.
Okay.
So yeah, we knew each other well.
You knew each
we'd
other
worked
well.
with each other across geographies and products and segments for about 10 years at this point.
And he says here he's torn between wanting to stand up for my team but also not wanting to get dragged into the cannot mentality. I'll pick up with Chris about how to deal with the specific issue, i.e. the threat of a speak up, which I believe is too strong and not helpful here. I mean, I just point out, he says it's too strong. It doesn't go further than that, correct?
That's what he says.
And when you say, you then give a reply, which you will be familiar with, 970 to 971.
Yep.
And if we see points 4 and 5 of that, if I could just, rather than read them out to you, I'd suggest to you simply, it's your email, but at the time, I'd suggest that you thought that Hong Kong compliance also bore responsibility for this incident as well as Mr. Mahmood, correct?
It's an email that I wrote at the time and I've had to read many times since, including most recently. I think it's fairly balanced and I can see there is definitely an agreement needs a piece brokered or a position brokered here, which is why you would come to myself and Chris, given we effectively ran the function globally between us.
And then we see at point 2, which again you'll be familiar with, that shows a hostile reaction to the claimant, correct?
It shows a hostile reaction to the use of the word speak up as the first way of settling a professional disagreement before going through the normal channels, which would be to take it to your leaders, your managers, and try to get a decision.
And but you expand from that point, don't you, into some wider points over the next lines, and you say we need to get this feedback to Adam as his manager. Speaking up totally out of line needs to be discussed. He should not use it as a threat. I'd be expecting him to collaborate by bringing in management. Shouldn't be. It goes back to this issue of a speak up, correct?
Yeah, correct. You can see from Joel's email to Chris, the reason that he's introduced us in managers is because when a speak up is invoked, people need to start protecting themselves and making sure that their choices happen in a more public arena because they they would be concerned as to what the repercussions of not doing so would be.
Effectively, what you're saying is once you get to speak up, everyone, as you put it, has to start covering themselves and sort of carefully doing X and Y.
No. No.
Okay.
No, that's your characterisation of what I just said, Mr. Bickford-Smith. Once you start using the word speak up, people know what the consequences of that are, so they want more people to understand what is going on to help them reach the right resolution without having to go down that route, which could have been achieved without using the word speak up.
You met with you make a trip to Dubai in March 2018, correct?
Correct. Mr.
Mahmood's position is that when you meet with him one-to-one, you reprimand him over this incident, correct? And your evidence in reply is to say that you note difficult conversations in your notebook, and this isn't one of them, and you didn't consider you'd reprimanded him, correct? This is it's your own evidence, so it's paragraph...
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah. Simply put it to you that it was well, put the following things to you. Do you agree, Mr. Phoebe, that you're a very direct person?
I can't comment on how people experience me, Mr. Bickford-Smith.
You didn't. What your evidence really amounts to saying you didn't intend this as a reprimand. Is that correct? I mean, it wasn't a sort of formal reprimand, but you agree that you said to him you shouldn't have done this, correct?
No, well, what happened was, and obviously having read this and seen some of the stuff in the bundle caused me to go back to my diary. I arrive on the Monday. I give a presentation to the entire compliance team on global initiatives. At that point, I leave that meeting and immediately ask my PA to set up 2 extra meetings, one of which is with Shiraz. My interpretation would be that was at his request. And then after my management team meeting, which is why I'm in Dubai, I then have that, I make time for him, which he himself references in the bundle. And during that, although my own notes when I wrote my statement, but having looked at the bundle, and you can see at 1385, I drop a note back to Adam.
Unfortunately, Mr. I think there's a problem with the sound. Can you hear us still?
I can hear you. Yeah.
We can hear you when you're looking at us like that. It seems to be when you go sideways that there's a problem. Anyway, okay, keep going. Okay, that's
so
fine.
sorry. When I changed, so at 1391, my own written notes didn't say, but I dropped a note to Adam on the plane, which sets out a piece of the discussion I had. But as you'll also see, and the team will need to remind you at what point, Shiraz asked for the meeting and wanted to raise a couple of things with me in the meeting.
Can I ask you, as you've been looking at the bundle, did you see the emails at 1384? Did you see your email, the email from Mr. Long at 1384?
Yeah, I saw that, yeah.
So, suggest to you that the idea that Mr. Long and the idea that you and Mr. Mahmood should speak was driven by Mr. Long, who wants you to give him some sort of coaching advice.
Not correct. When I come to town, lots of people want me to meet with lots of people, and I often say yes. It doesn't mean it always happens. He wasn't on my list of people to meet, and I hadn't pre-arranged a meeting with him. Which I think elsewhere in the bundle there is an acceptance of a meeting, and it's in Manu's room. I wouldn't have known before getting on the ground that I could use Manu's office because he wouldn't be there. So the meeting with him was set up while I was in Dubai. It's not timestamped, but it would have been while I was in Dubai. I would say the email from Shiraz to me on 1385 says, "Thank you for making time to meet with me," which makes me recall that he asked to see me. 1385. And he's asking for my help. And it also suggests he has a list of things he wants to talk to me about.
Well, none of this is in your statement, is it, Mr. Phoebe?
No, because at that time I hadn't gone through every email I've sent in the last 10 years, but I saw it in the bundle, and given you just referenced it, I felt it was important to raise it.
My understanding, which is all happening in live time, is that there was a dinner, correct, of the Mr. Long's direct reports and you, correct?
So Monday evening, a dinner is arranged, and Mr. Long's reports, which is effectively my team as well, because they're all my people who do my products and segments, just expressed on the ground. I'm at that dinner. I sit, if not with or next to Shiraz, which I remember vividly because it's the first time I'd seen a vaping machine. And I remember talking to him very cordially that evening.
And I suggest that at that dinner you said you suggested a meeting and he then sent you an invite. Is that what happened?
No. I would say if you look at, I can't admit it into evidence, but my own records that this has had me go back to is following the 4 o'clock meeting where I talked to 20 compliance officers, including Shiraz. After that, 3 people asked me for a follow-up meeting, Caroline and Gigi, Vivek Padmanabhan and Shiraz, and I go to Wendy, my PA, and say, before I leave, can you find me time to speak to these 3 people, which is why the team will have to remind you where in the bundle there is a email where Shiraz accepts an invite from me with Manu's office as the venue. I wouldn't have known Manu's office was available until I was in Dubai, and I meet him there. So I didn't ask to see him that night, and as 1385 would suggest to me, he asked to see me, and he had a list of things he wanted to talk to me about, asked for my help. At that meeting, Mr. Bickford-Smith, giving the reference you said to what I wrote to Adam on the plane, which I think is at 1391, I did take the opportunity to say what I've said in my statement, ask him to work better with the network if he wants to be successful.
In terms of the things that Mr. Mahmood raised with you, do you agree that he raised the issue of difficulties he was having securing engagement with him by the GIB unit?
Not at that meeting, no. I remember him and he himself having, for transparency, I watched Shiraz's cross-examination. It was at a subsequent meeting when he came to Singapore as Adam's pick to come to the next face-to-face, which I reference on 1391 as well, I think.
And that is in April 2018, is that correct?
Yeah. So when he comes there, he walks into my office, and I think he said I was the first person he saw. At that point, I think he raises the issue then, yeah.
And he spoke with you about how different GIB was from the rest of the bank in specific examples. So, for example, he explained to you that when he had joined the unit, GIB staff were using personal phones, etc., correct?
I have no recollection of what he said to me about the GIB business. It was a morning conversation. He walked into my office, I recall, with a big smile on his face and sat down and chatted to me. We're both early birds. And he sat down and spoke to me, and I think that's the point at which he tells me in his evidence that I said he should give that feedback directly to the business through 365.
And do you agree that's what you did?
I have no recollection. It was one of many meetings I had, but if he says I said that and he has said it, then I have no reason to.
Now, there are various things that are not suggested. For example, no one is saying that you saw this 365 feedback before it was suggested. But so can we just fast forward to the moment when the feedback has been left? So can we go to 1598? And this is when you, at least in terms of the emails, get looped back in. I should just ask you, I've gone from April to September. Was there anything else you'd heard in that period about feedback, this 365? Had you heard that it was going to be given? Had you heard anything, or do you have no recollection of anything?
Zero recollection of anything.
So we then pick this up on the 24th of September. And we see there Mr. Long is emailing you and Mr. O'Donnell, and you've obviously reread the bundle, so this is an email with which I suspect you're familiar, but if not, I'm happy to go through it with you.
I'm familiar with it.
First point here, the fact that Mr. Mahmood had views about Mr. Akbar's performance wouldn't have been surprising to you, or was it surprising to you, or was this something you were not surprised by?
I would expect anyone who works in my team as part of a business management team to have views on other members of that management team.
And were you aware?
And often we're asked for those views. Sorry, Mr. Witt. Often we're asked for those views as their risk and control partner. And did you know that? Did you know Mr. Long's views about this situation before this email exchange? I.e., did you know his views about the unit and its engagement with compliance? Was that something you discussed with Mr. Long? I ask because you say in your evidence that you spoke to him on an almost weekly basis, and he has effectively taken over your role. So my question is, had you and he discussed the unit and its engagement with compliance? I honestly can't remember Mr. Bickford-Smith. Adam is a very thorough man and raises long lists of things that we used to talk about in our one-to-ones.
And now what has happened, we can see, is Mr. Long is saying, well, some of this is quite critical and arguably harsh, but at the same time, there are valid performance issues raised that require attention. I'm concerned this point is being missed. And so that's the email. You then come back to say you're very supportive, especially if you observe similar, and you should add your voice to Shiraz's. However, in separate, continued indications of some maturity gaps and need for further coaching. Correct? That was your take
Correct.
on the two issues. Now,
Correct.
Don't have any problem. Don't have any question to put to you about that, but I do have a question to put to you here about paragraph 40 of your statement, and this is at, I think you said you had a copy, 7692 for those in the bundle. So then you start this halfway down. First half, no question. Then we say it's a summary email. Then you say, in my view, it's very important that feedback is delivered in a way which does not come as a surprise to the individual's people leader. Then you go on about course correction. The claimant had presented a lengthy diatribe covering an extended period of time to a people leader who was about to make a compensation decision. I felt it was professionally immature of the claimant and unfair on Mr. Sheikh. It indicated to me that either the claimant didn't understand the importance of building positive working relationships, including the CEO, or didn't not understand how to do so. I suggest to you this is wisdom after the event, isn't it, Mr. Phoebe? This is
Can
your.
you
I'd suggest to you. That,
rephrase?
I'd suggest to you that this is your view now on looking at at Mr. Mahmood's emails and so on, preparing for this case. It's not actually a view that you held at the time. You don't say anything in your email here about how about these things, about how things should have gone to Mr. Sheikh for pre-clearance or anything like that, do you?
Hang on. What do I say? So I say, Adam, let's talk about this. Very supportive. Agree, but I am agreeing with Adam that it should have gone to the CEO. So, given you brought it up, Mr. Bickford Smith, one of my roles was to give feedback on many of the bank's most senior leaders at around this time in September, and there's examples of it in bundle. Great example.
Sorry, Mr. Phoebe, we can't hear you. I wonder if you could repeat that answer again.
So one of my roles, Judge, is to give feedback on many of the bank's most senior leaders, and late September to October is precisely when you do that to help the year-end process. In the bundle, there are examples I provided of me doing that, which is why I was so supportive of the feedback. So it's not post, Mr. Bickford Smith. When I give feedback on an individual, I make sure their people leaders know I'm giving it. And 1796 is a helpful example of me doing that at exactly the same time as Shiraz is doing the same. So, Judge, if it's helpful, 1796 is me giving feedback on a very senior member of staff through what's called the P3 process, which I know you know, and if you can see, it's first week of October, which isn't too far away from the period we're talking about, and I've discussed it with as directed, it should say directed, not as direct. This has all been discussed with Paul Skelton, one of the individual supervisors, who told me it gone to Simon Cooper, Ben Hunt, who are on the bank's management team, and that both Nick Finucci, my boss, and Dave are aware of it. So my training, Mr. Bickford Smith, is when you give feedback, which is critical, and this is incredibly critical of this individual, I make sure that their people leaders know I'm about to write that, because they will then have to make decisions at that point in the year around the individual's compensation. When Shiraz asked me in April to give feedback 365 is called 365 for a very good reason. It should be provided throughout the year, not only at year end when you're about to decide on somebody's compensation. So there is I recognise that there's a mismatch in the timings there. I had assumed Shiraz, when it wrote to me, Shiraz was giving that feedback as part of the year-end process on the COO. And at that point, as complementary to this email I've just shown you, I would have expected the CEO. So no, it's not hindsight. Sorry for the long answer, but I thought it was a helpful example.
As you want to look at this, let's look at 1800. Yeah? So this is a detailed feedback into DPAC, correct? And
Correct.
Let's just begin with point number 2. Does this person partner effectively with compliance? For this one, my honest answer would be no. I find DPAC difficult to deal with, as his default response to most compliance requests is to challenge the decision, and he does not necessarily lead a discussion with a control hat on. Yeah, and you then go into detail. Now, suggest to you that there is a similarity between the direct type of feedback that you've given here and the direct feedback that Mr. Mahmood has given about Mr. Akbar?
I agree with you, yeah. And what I would say, Mr. Bickford-Smith, is if you look at the timing, 2010, I've been with the bank 2 years. I was a band 4, and this is one of my learnings, to not come in at the end of the year with feedback like this, because it's not fair on the people leader. So when Adam and I and others were trying to coach Shiraz, it's a learning culture, right? I had learned not to do that, because Deepak here has clearly been rated A, and I was being asked by Catherine, who was the global head of compliance at the time, do you agree he's an A rater? I say no. I learned over the course of my career, it's not fair to say that at that time. I should have been given that feedback directly. And that is precisely the coaching that we were trying to give to Shiraz, having learned the hard way myself from this and several other examples over the subsequent years. That's the performance coaching we were trying to give to Shiraz.
Now, there are several points coming out there. The first is, you'd agree that this 365 feedback that Mr. Mahmood has given, your view is there needs to be some coaching. But what I'd suggest to you is that when you wrote that email and you learnt your lesson with the DPEC incident, I mean, let me put it this way: were you in a position after that where your sort of P3 and comp were adversely affected for having written that feedback about DPEC?
It's 14 years ago, Mr. Bickford-Smith. I can't remember. But I had learned. Sorry, what I had learned, Mr. Bickford-Smith, is it adversely affected my relationship with senior leaders. I did that.
Sorry, Mr. Phoebe, we lost you again. I wonder if you could repeat that answer for us.
What I had learned, Judge, is that I should have given that feedback directly to DPAC's people leader, not just the compliance officer, in terms of managing my local stakeholders and local management team.
And you say that when you were speaking to Mr. Mahmood in April about the feedback, you assumed that he was going to be doing it round about then, not at later in the year when it could have a potential impact on a P3, correct?
From my recollection, as I say, it was a ad hoc conversation when he walked into my office the morning he got to Singapore. And he asked what he would do if I was in my. From recollection, he said, "What would you do if you were in my position?" I said, "I would use 365." Bill Winters had introduced Feedback 365 so that feedback could be a continuous process through the year and not a one and done at the end of the year. It's why it's called 365. So yes, I would have expected him to go back and make that feedback more real time rather than towards the end of the year.
Now, you'd have expected that. It's not a criticism of you, it's a question of fact. Do you accept that you didn't say to him, you should do this now and not at year end? That just wasn't something that came up in the conversation at all, one way or the other, correct?
I can't remember, Mr. Bickford-Smith. But yes, I would have said it the same to anyone else who would have turned up and asked me the same thing across the hundreds of people that me and Chris supervised.
And if we go back to your example at your covering email to Mr. Long, which I think is an email that you may already have referred to. My apologies, I'm on the... But one of the things you say to Mr. Long is, isn't it, here are some examples of very direct feedback I've given in the past. And, it is possible to give robust feedback, correct? Let me find. It's unfair to you. I've got to find the email.
I found.
Yeah.
1779.
Yeah.
I got the sense that both Manu and Adam hadn't necessarily seen this level of feedback. And as I think I said in my email, I was very supportive. If Shares thought the COO needed to be changed and developed, I have no problem giving development or negative feedback. Too much feedback is just positive. This guy's great, right? I have no problem with it whatsoever. My problem, my challenge, and where I think it should have been done better is how it was delivered with respect to supervisors, not the content. And Adam and Manu, I don't think we're used to this level of feedback. Now, my role as a material risk taker and a member of these bank management was to do it formally. You will see in the attachments in my covering email to Adam, these are risk and control questionnaires. That's a very formal process where the uppermost leaders of the bank, risk and control, have to give performance feedback on them, and it has to be balanced. So I was just showing them it is not unusual to come out with that level of, let's call it negativity or constructive criticism, because I don't think they'd seen it before. So that's what I'm trying to help Adam and Manu with there, that it is not the content that's the problem, the delivery might have been better.
Well, specifically, what you're helping, I'd say specifically looking at 1779, you're specifically helping Adam in a discussion that he's having with Manu, i.e. effectively you're saying to Adam, look, if Manu is saying this feedback should never have been given, actually, you know, it is acceptable to give this level of direct feedback. That's what you're doing in your email and your attachments, correct?
I think that's fair. As managing directors within the function, we peer coach each other around how we should be giving feedback and how we should be leading our teams. Did
you know that Adam had seen a drafts of this feedback and had said
no,
and had okayed it?
No, I don't recall that. The first I recall seeing it is when Adam sends me the message, which you've already referenced.
Then we have, I mean, just taking this forward, once the feedback has been given, the 365 feedback has been given, yeah? There's one piece here which is about how Mr. Mahmood, what happens to him. You can't really, I mean, I should just confirm this. You're not in any position to comment. You didn't have a discussion with Mr. de Groot, Mr. Sheikh about a P3 rating. This isn't something you can give evidence on, correct?
Correct.
There's a second piece, though, which is from a compliance perspective. Once feedback like that is given, you would expect it to be looked at by someone in terms of its substance, in terms of what it says about the person who is the subject of the feedback, correct?
Correct.
Now, we then, I'm now changing topic, the claimant's P3 rating. So you 2030.
Yep.
You're forwarded into an email chain from it's Mr. Long to you and Mr. O'Donnell. Sorry, I should just say I'm about to go into a thing. I mean, I think the court may want to carry on. I'm still expecting to get done, but I'm very much expecting to get done by lunch. But if this is a convenient moment, if it's convenient to the court.
How much longer do you think you'll be, Mr. How much longer do you think you'll be?
I would have thought about 1 hour.
All right. Well, why don't we go to 11:30, take a break then, and we'll resume then.
Okay, crack on. Okay. Let's go through actually to. I think that given those timelines, I'm going to just slightly change the order. That's fine. Can I ask you to go, please, to put this into your witness statement? It's at paragraph 46. This is the BMA about changing the reporting line. Yep.
Yep.
Now, can I then take you, please, to 3268. This is an email you're copied into from Adam Long to Fiona Ferguson, and those copied include you, Mr. de Groot, Mr. O'Donnell, so some very senior compliance people, correct?
Correct.
And what's said there is, I appreciate that all regions are in a holding pattern in terms of proceeding with our respective regional layer, etc. Now, what this is effectively hiring and firing decisions have been put in suspense, effectively. Is that's what's being said there? Is that right?
I think that's an unfair characteristic of what I see. People leave, roles being eliminated from the org structure would have been an outcome of Project IC. It wasn't the reason we were doing it.
I think you may have misheard the question, but what I'm saying to you is that what has happened is that for whatever reason, at this point in time, namely September 2019, people are in a holding pattern, i.e. they are not making decisions one way or the other on issues, correct?
Yeah, it's going back a while, but IC was suspended for a period of time, correct?
And then what's being sought to... I mean, have you read this email recently, or do you want me to take you through it?
No, I haven't read it recently.
Okay, I'll take you through it. So, paragraph 2, I was hoping we could get your permission to proceed in effecting a change in the Islamic banking compliance space on the basis that this role does not exist in other regions and therefore will not affect the role out of a consistent CFCC regional layer TOM. So what's being sought here effectively is, if you like, a dispensation. I.e., yes, there is this holding pattern, but can we proceed to make this change? I think you should just read the email to yourself. The court is familiar with this email. So if you just read this email to yourself, and if you disagree with my characterisation, please say so.
I've read it. Can you remind me of your...
What I'm saying is that... test my memory, Phoebe. I was looking at my next question. The question was, what's being sought here is a dispensation. I.e., yes, there is this general holding pattern, but we want to proceed to make this change, correct?
I think that's what he's asking for, yeah. I mean, it's sent to Fiona. I'm copied in a lot of emails, but it's sent to Fiona. From memory, Fiona was project managing the regional... Sorry, it's a noise. That's better. Fiona was project managing the regional target operating model.
Ms. Phoebe, it's not math for now. It may be something you want to look into when we take our break, but I have to say this courtroom is pretty quiet. So you may just want to check whether there's any noise or problem at your end.
I'm in a very small soundproof booth.
Okay, well, there we go. Well, there we are. We'll just have to be even quieter. Maybe someone's turned up the mics very high. I don't know. Maybe this is something we'll look at.
So to repeat, because it seems better now, Fiona was project managing the regional target operating model, and it looks like they are seeking a dispensation to go ahead because there looks like there's been a general pause on the regional model, would be my reinterpretation of an email I was copied into.
And do you agree that Mr. Long's email seeking that dispensation was as a result of a discussion between Mr. de Groot and others about changing about making this change. Can you help the court with your recollection, if any, of that discussion?
I honestly don't have a recollection. Chris and I ran the function effectively. We were copied in almost every email at that point around all of the target operating models for all the products and segments, country, region. So this did not stand out to me. I get copied in a lot of emails, Mr. Bickford-Smith. So sorry, I can't be more helpful.
And then Fiona Ferguson comes back saying, yes, you can proceed. You don't need it.
Yeah, I see that, yeah.
And then we see the next step in this process is an email that you're not copied into, but I should just take you to it because I'm going to ask you a question about it. 3455, there is, this is Mrs. Badgewer, who is the head of HR. There's going to be it says here, an email in the middle of the page, I've assessed that there is a significant change in role above 30%. Not the 30% figure is the number at which a role becomes at risk, correct?
No, not correct. It's the role, it's the number at which a role is reassessed as to whether it needs to be re-advertised, which means that other people haven't have a chance to apply for that job. So it's not that the role goes at risk because the role's needed. To place a role at risk means it's at risk of elimination. What it means, the role is expanded, which might mean the individual who may or may not be in the role at the time might not be the right individual if the expanded role needs expanded capabilities and experience.
Right. Well, that's interesting, because could you look up at 3455, the email at the top of the page? So this is an email from Mrs. Al-Najjar, who's the head of ER. We've had the head of HR, now we've got the head of ER.
Yep.
She's emailing Simon Bucket. You may or may not have read this in the bundle, but Mr. Bucket is an I3 investigator. I don't know if you've come across him or not. But what's said here is confirm the new proposed role is a new role with more than 30% change. The current role SM is in will be considered redundant, and he will soon be served with an at-risk letter. So that suggests that there sort of is an automatic trigger. But do you have any comment on that?
No comment. Employee relations are the right people to determine that.
And if we go to 3269, this is an email that you are copied into. No, you're not copied into. My apologies. So we see here that the rationale that's given to Mr. O'Donnell and Mr. de Groot. Can I just clarify one point? Would you have expected to be copied into this email exchange, or did you regard this as something that was out of your region being handled, out of your area being handled by Mr. de Groot and Mr. O'Donnell? That's the simple question here.
Chris and Manu were managing, Adam. Adam and Manu or Chris and Manu?
Well, we have Mr.
Sorry,
Long is sending the email, and then he's sending it to Mr. O'Donnell and Mr. de Groot.
So Adam, Manu and Chris would have been responsible for the regional target operating model. So I'm not surprised I wasn't copied in this one.
Now, see, the reason I've had to ask you these questions is at paragraph 47 of your email here. Of your witness statement, you saying, I recall having discussions with Mr. Long, Mr. Sheikh and Mr. O'Donnell before and after the BMA review about how best to separate the Sharia reporting line from GIB. We agreed that the best way to do so was to have the Sharia department report into a new GIB compliance role, and that this change could be established structurally as part of the Project ICE organisation, which was due to be implemented towards the end of 2019. Do you have any recollection of those conversations?
Not specifically, no.
Okay. So we then and also, when this proposal went away, were you told this has gone away, it's all over, or was this something that just passed you by? Because this proposal sort of disappears. But was that something ever communicated to you, or do you have any recollection one way or the other?
Sorry, Mr. Biffin, which proposal?
If
the
you,
proposal
I should
move
help,
the reporting line?
I should help you. It's paragraph
Or the
40.
timing?
You should have a look at paragraph 49 of your witness statement.
Yeah, so which proposal? The proposal around the structural change or the timeline?
It says this change, which is the change, the structural change, never took place because Project ICE was postponed until the following year. Yeah? So my question to you is, do you actually have any recollection of it being postponed? Or can you help us in any way about this, or is it just something you can't comment on?
I remember Project ICE being postponed. I don't remember this as one of dozens and dozens of components of ICE being specifically postponed. If that's helpful. Sorry, it's not meant to be it's not meant to be unhelpful. I remember ICE being postponed. That's the limit of my recollection.
Now, so picking this up, paragraph 50, we have ICE returning. At paragraph 52 of your witness statement, you give quite a long narrative, and one of the things you say here is that you subsequently designed the CFCC target operating model at group, country and regional level. One of the many structural proposals I made to senior CFCC management was to downgrade the existing regional heads of FM CFCC roles who sat in London, Singapore, Hong Kong and Dubai to executive director, i.e. band 4. And then you explain the rationale. And then at paragraph 53, you say, and this is for those on the bundle 7697, in relation to Mr. Patel's role of Head of Compliance for Financial Markets, it was also to be combined with the role of Head of Compliance for GIB to create a new Managing Director level role called Head FM and Islamic. Now, at this stage, I don't know whether you have been sent well, I suspect you will not have been sent transcripts. Have you? You haven't been sent transcripts, have you, of previous days' evidence?
No, absolutely not. I was requested.
Okay, well, we're due to take a break. There are just a couple of little bits of transcript about this design that we're going to need to go to, with apologies. The alternative is to try and put them up on a screen here, or to read them out.
Well, they should be on this. They should be available. Oh, he wouldn't have them.
Yeah, that's the issue.
Of course. All right. Right. Well, perhaps why don't we break now, and we can talk about use the break to work out ways to do it. How long of passages do you need?
There are, in fact, just 2 passages of the transcript. It's about that much text in total.
Well, I wonder if we could. Is there any way we could get hard copies printed off of those pages and sent to Mr. Phoebe where he is? Perhaps a couple of pages either side, because sometimes context is important.
If my learned friend wishes to email to my solicitors or myself the pages of the PDF that he wishes to take the witness to, we can arrange for that to be emailed to him promptly.
Yes. Right.
Okay, I'll do that.
Right. Well, we'll adjourn for 10 minutes, and resume whenever that's been done. If that takes longer than 10 minutes.
Rice?
It's just 2 very brief bits, to be honest with you. Degrute 131, long 171. And that page, by the way, where it says 131, it's the page at the bottom. And I've just realised I produced an illegible thing here for Mr. Long, 171. And James, I'm going to do something which is just, if you do this with care, that.
Sorry, I don't want to sit and listen in. I assume I'll just get an email.
Yeah, that's fine. There's nothing secret about this. So there you go. That's the text you're looking for, yeah, from the two transcripts. So just check that is actually in there. Yeah. Okay. It's Degrute and Long. It's those paragraphs, and I give a couple of pages either side, maybe. You should get 4 pages to the page.
Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, let me get my notebook. the transcripts, it doesn't work. You're just going to have to go to the page of the transcripts. And you get the PDF.
Oh, do I just need to set the page to the relevant date?
We're just sending.
Oh.
Stage 4, 4 and 5.
And you should open them, obviously, when told to
Yeah.
by the judge. Sorry, this extraction idea sounded like a neat one, but it doesn't actually work.
That's interesting.
Because the problem we have with it is if he says, well, I want to look at this or that, a few pages around, just make it there. What's the PDF page? We're ready whenever.
Is Mr. Phoebe ready?
That's a good question. The answer appears to be no.
Mr. Phoebe?
Waiting.
Okay.
I'm here. I'm ready.
Thank you.
I haven't sent the email yet because I haven't had the details, so I suggest we wait till it goes through before we call the judge back.
Have you sent an email? Yeah. It should be with you on the way in the ether.
In the evening.
Can you give me the transcript?
You say days 4 and 5?
Yeah.
Could you just give me the page references?
It's PDF. Sorry, not PDF. It's internal page.
So day 4, internal page.
Sorry, I've got it wrong. It's here. Could you give me a pen? Yes. Okay, here you go. I think that's the ones on the right. I think the PDF visuals.
Actually, can you just give me the, I forgot that, can you give me the internal page?
The left-hand one.
131.
131.
Can you read those out to me? It might not be easy. With the pages as well.
It's day 4, 132.
Yeah.
Are these both day 4 references?
No, the first one is day 4, the second one is day 5.
All right.
Thank you. Be seated, please. Can we get Mr. Phoebe back? There we are.
I'm here, Judge.
Good.
You should just have had come to you, or be having coming to you from Mr. True, some PDFs by email.
Okay, let me look out.
And one of them should be labelled something like day 4, and the other one should be labelled day 5.
Nothing yet. Nothing yet. I'll tell you when I get it.
If the worst comes to the worst, I'll just read it out.
It's definitely been sent to us, so we'll just-
Yeah, no, it's just a firewall issue. If the worst comes to the worst, I'll just read it out.
Nothing yet. Could it be placed? Could the team place it where the trial bundle is, and I might be able to access it there?
The alternative is that I may just read it out, and hopefully the email gets there in the meantime, and I'm going to do that. And
Why don't we take that course then?
so, day 4 was the cross-examination of Mr. de Groot, and at page 131 of the transcript, which is at page 33 of the PDF when it arrives, I asked a question of Mr. de Groot was as follows. As regards this project ICEE issue, comma, what happens in summary is that because you were not, is it your case, were you involved in the design of the new structure? So just to repeat that, what I say to Mr. de Groot is, as regards the project ICEE issue, what happens in summary is that because you were not, is it your case, were you involved in the design of the new structure? And Mr. de Groot's answer was, for the region, I was leading the design of the new structure. So that's the first reference. Did you hear that okay?
Yes, I did. Yeah.
And then Mr. Long, on day 5, which was last Friday, I asked a question which was a series of questions. So this was prompted, he gives an answer. My view was that it went through a number of colleagues and stakeholders, and we thought it was a sensible approach. Who was it? And then I asked the question, who was it who designed the structure? And the answer was, his answer was, who was it who designed this structure? I can't recall the combination as a combination that could make sense. A lot of the Islamic projects are based on underlying FM infrastructure. I'm sorry, I can't recall who raised it, if it was myself or somebody else, but I definitely thought it was a doable idea. So that's the idea about combining Islamic with FM. Yeah? So the question I have for you is, how did this structure design actually work? Was it led by Mr. de Groot, or was it led by you, or was it a bit of both?
So there are two parts to the outcome of two different designs. I was involved heavily and owned one. I didn't own the other one. And I wasn't involved in the overall outcome. So let me explain what I mean by that. I was the global head of products and segments. Financial markets is a product. The global head of financial markets, CFCC, reported to me, and their regional, the expression of them regionally, that would have been part of my design. So it was my decision and my construct to downgrade each regional head of FM clients from managing director band 4. A separate, entirely separate part of the IC restructure that I was responsible for was any managing director that is placed in a region has to wear a double hat. has to wear a double hat, either as a country head or as a product head. So that was my design. Agnostic of individual, that was my design. That's the limit at which I was involved in the architect of the blueprint. How that was then executed on in each region was down to the regional heads of both my world and let's call it Manu's world as the overall head of CFCC. Does that make sense? I know we're complicated, but that's how the division of labour was.
Now, can I take you please to, in the bundle, if you've got that, the main bundle we've been working on today, can I take you please to 4537? I'll repeat that. 4537.
Yeah, me and Janine, yeah.
Hi Tom, I'm done, and sorry, who was Janine Sim, if you could help the court?
Yeah, so Janine was essentially my right hand, a grade 5 employee who was helping me put my design principles into PDFs, into org charts, into blueprints, and was coordinating how that material was going through to the steering group. So Janine was my right hand, who did a lot of my execution.
Now, what she says is, hi Tom, so she's writing to you, this is the first I am on the page. I'm done with AME, so that's Africa and the Middle East, correct?
Yes.
I think we may need to sequence, as I'm uncertain if Zunaid can be appointed into the Islamic banking role. Spoke with Adam, who said Shiraz should be flagged as a redundancy candidate. We talked about that, Tom Phoebe. Okay. Should I draw up the sequencing? Chris is okay with the names. That's the Chris O'Donnell, is that correct?
Yeah, that would be Chris O'Donnell, yeah.
Though wants to take my name and his off. I'll take his off if he's nervy about it, Janine. I have jumped straight into the structure as envisaged by Adam. That's Mr. Long, is that right?
Yeah, that's Adam Long, yeah.
And then you say, not now. You need to log off and enjoy your evening. And so even though it says 13:28, I'm assuming that's a time zone issue.
It's probably 9:38. It's probably plus 8 hours, I'd imagine. Or 4, depending on who printed it.
The first question arising from this, put it to you that what this suggests is that the structure is being designed in part around the names, rather than it being a case where you decide a structure and then works out who fits into it.
Without seeing the entirety of what Janine and I were talking to above this and below this, I can't give you a definite answer there.
Second, why is it uncertain if Zunaid could be appointed into the Islamic banking role?
Because my recollection would be no one could be appointed into those new roles. A selection process should be run, and that was always been my belief, that where a new role is created, selection should be done. People can apply for the jobs. You should not appoint. That's not the right thing to do.
And the position here is that he had almost no experience of Islamic banking, did he?
That's not correct.
Well, FM offers one Islamic product, correct?
No, multiple. Almost every conventional product in the FM product universe has an Islamic variant. So we're talking dozens and dozens and dozens, not one.
And the idea of putting him in charge of compliance for a specialist unit covering 31 jurisdictions, together with an FM role, was a pretty extraordinary double hat, wasn't it?
Not in my opinion. No, I was global head looking after the delivery of my products and segments in 60 plus jurisdictions. So no.
And third, it seems to be implicit in this that the claimant is going to be made redundant, correct?
Adam, no. So I'm just reading what was said here. I have no recollection of this discussion, but it's written down. Adam has said Shiraz should be flagged as a redundancy candidate. I didn't offer view in this exchange, and I don't offer a view now.
Now, you continue to deal with Mr. Long. You continue to speak with him on a weekly basis over this period. I'd suggest to you that by this stage, i.e. July 2020, you knew that Mr. Mahmood was going to be leaving the bank one way or another, correct?
I can't recall, Mr. Bickford-Smith. As I say in my statement, there were dozens of people whose roles were displaced at this time, and Mr. Mahmood was not specific to that. There were hundreds of roles displaced across CFCC by IC.
Right, but we've seen you, we've been through in the emails, you having interactions with different people in the bank about Mr. Mahmood. Can I just clarify here? First of all, were you aware that Mr. Mahmood had been put through a disciplinary?
I can't recall that. I don't recall it. I don't think it was known to me.
Do you recall talk of Mr. Mahmood having been offered a mutual separation agreement?
I don't recall that. I don't recall it.
Do you recall conversations about a strong adverse reaction to him from members of the GIB unit management?
No.
As to the structure that was put in place, 4 FM CFCC roles were deleted, is that correct?
So just say that again.
I think this should be at paragraph, may I assist you, paragraph 53 of your witness statement?
Yeah. So yeah, I was just trying to get what you said at the beginning of your question. So yes, the regional heads of FM roles were restructured among hundreds of others.
And then the decision was made to combine Mr. Patel's role of Head of Compliance for Financial Markets with the role of Head of Compliance for GIB, correct?
That is what an outcome of that design theory, the principle that I gave you was that the FM heads would be reduced in role to band 4, and that anybody who was a managing director had to wear 2 hats.
But in terms of implementing, you've given this high-level proposal. In terms of who makes the specific decision, it's Mr. de Groot who makes that decision, is that, or is it Mr. Long, or was it you?
It wasn't me. So if you remember, Tracy, Group Head of Compliance, asked me to architect the target operating model for the whole function across all segments and all products. I was part of the architecture of that. It went up to the steering committee for approval. As to how that was executed would have been by the relevant senior leaders and people leaders. I was not involved in every single role that may or may have not been displaced, and therefore every individual that may have been placed as at risk as an outcome of that target operating model.
So the working through, you're not copied into the email, for example, on 4539? But this is the sort of working out of this process, correct?
It looks like it, yeah. This was going on in every country and every region, so I'm glad I wasn't copied on every email. But no, I'm not copied on this one yet.
So when you give evidence at paragraph 53 about what the objectives were, this is paragraph 53 of your statement. This was ultimately a decision made by Mr. de Groot, correct?
I don't think I say that. I say that this is an outcome of the IC blueprint. I don't know who made the final decision, and I can't review this far removed from that point in time about who had the decision rights at that time.
No, My
Sorry,
point
not
is
guess.
here.
It would have been Adam and Manu would have made that determination.
And you also aren't involved in the selection of Mr. Patel for that role, correct? You're not involved in the interview process or anything like that? Okay.
No, I was notified of the outcome, but I was not involved in this.
So it is not the case that as a result of your structure, it followed automatically that the claimant's role was going to be put at risk. It was, yes, you have got this architecture, but the working through of that architecture and the decisions are matters for others, correct?
Correct.
Now, I do just need to ask you this for the court record. At the time of making these decisions, working through this structure, is it your evidence that you were not aware of any decision to remove the claimant from the bank?
Correct. I was not aware. My role was philosophically to create a blueprint and a target operating model. I was not involved in the execution of that.
Now, that leaves the final bit of your statement, which I didn't, which I moved earlier, when we were discussing the timings of the short adjournment, and that was an important issue, which relates to the claimant's 2018 P3 rating, and this is at paragraphs 41 and following of your statement.
Yeah.
Now I think we should go to page 2030 of the bundle, and we can follow the email through. If you possibly best place to start reading is the bottom, the halfway down 2030. You see an email from Mr. Long to you and Mr. de Groot, copied in Adina Cameron. So Mr.
And Chris, sorry, and Chris.
And
remember
Chris O'Donnell.
O'Donnell,
Yeah.
we co-ran the whole team globally. Yeah. So generally, Mr. Bickford-Smith, this is because this is this week, 5 years ago. This week is bonus week. So I have many such emails in my inbox today about my tier. This is people giving feedback on how the compensation process has gone that week.
And
for context.
It's point 2 here on page 2031. Despite my attempts at managing expectations, he simply views himself as a 1A. We've had a long discussion today. I've really tried to recalibrate his mindset that a 2 is not a good performance rating. I'll continue to engage with him on this and advise what he can work on to get to a 1, but but when you have some time, I would appreciate if you could each have a conversation with him on how you view 1 versus 2 performance ratings. Yeah? Now, you then come back on 2030. And you say, I guess my thoughts are Shiraz needs to grow up if he thinks he's a 1A. He's not, and expanding management time to indulge him is counterproductive to how people regard him. He has had people spend an enormous amount of energy on his errors in the last 12 to 15 months. Now, suggest to you that the hostility that shows towards Mr. Mahmood is simply not explicable by your limited interactions with and concerning Mr. Mahmood, is it? Over the last 12 to 15 months. We've seen the Harris Law issue.
Yep.
We've seen the 365 issue. But here you are, really sounding off against him, aren't you?
I'm saying he's not a 1A here. And not just him. I think, as you can see, there's 2 individuals here. And this is Adam feeding back to Chris and I, probably at our request, how the P3 process has gone by the bonus time. But yeah, I'm critical of Shiraz. What I can't remember, Mr. Bickersmith, is what the other areas of judgment that constituted me that opinion. Obviously, Harris and HKMA is the one we've talked about at length. There may have been others, because it's unlikely I would have reached that determination just on the Harris example.
Well, this is the point to put to you. I mean, we're seeing here, you and Mr. Long are close professional colleagues, correct?
We're professional colleagues.
And Mr. de Groot, Mr. O'Donnell. Mr. O'Donnell is someone you, as you say, are running this part of the business with, correct? This part of the function, more accurately, yeah?
Yeah, but he lives in America. We've probably spent no more than a couple of days in each other's company, ever.
And then we've got Mr. de Groot. So it's a group of peers, correct? Plus Mr. Long, who's sort of a layer below, correct?
It's a group of relevant senior managers of the CFCC function.
And
but yeah, we're peers. We're all managing directors, correct?
And I put it to you that simple fact is you're all Caucasians, correct?
Correct.
And I put it to you that consciously or subconsciously, part of your reaction to the claimant and the reason why you feel so free to sound off about him in the way that you do is that he isn't.
I would completely disagree with that.
I have no further questions.
Thank you, Mr. Bickford-Smith. Mr. Setti, do you re-examine?
No re-examination, Your Honour, thank you.
Right, thank you. All right, thank you, Mr. Phoebe. That completes your evidence. You can leave the call now because we've got some legal things to talk about, so you can discontinue the call, and that completes your commitment to this case. And thank you for your assistance.
Thank you, Judge.
Thank you. Now, gentlemen, in terms of the timetable for submissions, that's all set and agreed? All happy with that?
Yes.
Yes.
Timetable for submissions is agreed. What remains to be done? I understand this has been the subject of correspondence. The chronology is going to be quite a bit of work. That's being worked on by those behind me. It would be, I just wanted to raise an issue now. It hasn't arisen yet, but I don't want to waste the time that we have here. It can be the case, as Your Honour knows, that there can be standoffs reached about these kind of chronologies, etc. My understanding of Your Honour's direction right at the start, which I must confess I have not reviewed on the transcript, but my understanding was that what Your Honour wanted was a chronology, which was detailed, which set out the facts, and as regards the precise description of the facts and so on, that was not going to be a sort of factor in. You just want a document.
I just want a document, and my view in relation to the chronology is if one party wants a reference to be put in the chronology, it goes in.
Yeah.
And I will evaluate. It's an aide memoire, it's not evidence. And if people want to describe things fancifully, then that'll probably not work in their favour. So it's...
I'm grateful for that. It's just to save some correspondence. That's
Yes. Right.
Yes,
Mr. Sethi?
I think that's helpful, Your Honour. We should aim to have a comprehensive, detailed, factual chronology which is as neutral.
Absolutely. The less rhetoric, the better.
The less rhetoric, the better indeed.
Yes.
And the other thing I think we want to avoid is it turning into a sort of quasi-pleading, C's
Yes.
case, D's case. It's just got to be...
No. It's just, as I say, it's motivated by self-interest, as I think I confessed at the beginning, and that is it's my aid to judgment writing so that I can be sure that I have paid attention to everything that you want me to take into account.
Yes. And where facts have emerged from oral testimony, there'll be cross-referencing to transcript
yes.
references and things of that kind.
Yes.
So you want all the cross-referencing that we can
Yes. All the
reasonably
help
practically
all the
put
help
together.
you can reasonably give me.
Quite.
All right.
And
That's understood.
I think that beyond that, unless there's any housekeeping issue that anyone has to raise...
There's just something I'd like to say in relation to submissions, and have a seat, gentlemen. I'm going to sound like a broken record. And I say this, of course, retaining a completely open mind, and that's undoubtedly true. I still haven't formed a view about where this case is going to end up. And, of course, I'll be very much assisted by your submissions, which is why I want to tell you what I would find particularly helpful. I've said many times that this is a case about, primarily about unlawful discrimination. It's not a royal commission into the bank. It's not a case of judicial review of the bank's processes. It's not for me to decide whether what has been called the Sharia conflict of interest was either an actual conflict of interest or a perceived conflict of interest, or whether the position occupied by Mr Mahmood was properly graded as a grade 4, or whether the bank's grievance processes are generally adequate, or whether the bank's performance assessment processes are generally adequate, or whether those processes or the grievance disciplinary process or the appeal process miscarried in relation to Mr Mahmood, unless those things are related to unlawful discrimination by reason of a characteristic which is protected by law. So what I'm saying is the primary focus of the submissions that I would find most helpful is upon the evidence relating to unlawful discrimination and its consequences. And so unless there is some connection between the way in which the claimant was treated by the bank and the evidence of unlawful discrimination, then the evidence of disadvantageous treatment of itself is not relevant to the claim of unlawful discrimination. Now, of course, I accept that a connection between unlawful discrimination and disadvantageous treatment can be established by inference. But inferences have to be drawn logically from evidence. They can't be drawn by suspicion or conjecture. And disadvantageous treatment of itself is not evidence of unlawful discrimination unless there is some evidence which would enable that connection to be drawn. And so to take an example based on what we heard this morning, the evidence about the issue relating to the regulatory cap on the value of Islamic banking business in Hong Kong, unless there is some evidence enabling the court to infer that the way in which Mr Mahmood was treated in relation to that issue was connected in some way to unlawful discrimination, then it won't be necessary for the court to decide whether it was Mr Mahmood or Mr Law who behaved inappropriately, if indeed either of them did, or whether both of them behaved inappropriately. Now, I'm not saying that inferences can't be drawn from an accumulation of incidents viewed in the whole, but I am saying that what I would find of greatest assistance is a focus upon the evidence of unlawful discrimination and the inferences which can properly be drawn from that evidence, as I say, viewed collectively or individually, as to the consequences of the unlawful discrimination, because that is what this case is primarily about.
Your Honour, that's very helpful, and it's not something it's very helpful, and it's something with which I would wholeheartedly concur. I think there is a stage in the analysis here which I should explain to Your Honour,
yes,
because I think it indeed is relevant to observations Your Honour has made. And I think I'm going to just explain this by reference to the position in law in the UK. I think it will become very rapidly apparent why it's of wider relevance. In the UK, the position is different. There are quite complicated provisions about burden, which I'm not going to burden Your Honour with. But one of the practical effects of this is this. The employee tries to put the material to make out a prima facie case. And then one of the things that happens at that stage is that the burden flips onto the other party, and what they do is they provide their alternative explanation of events. Now, one of the things here is, for example, the cross-examination we heard this morning about Mr. Law and Hong Kong. It's quite important to say what has happened here is that the bank has led, it's not a criticism, it's just a statement of fact. The bank has led very, very many pages of witness evidence about those incidents and what happened and what view it was formed of them. I think really it was matter for it to explain why, but it might be said that that's by way of an alternative explanation for how the claimant was treated. Now that is the purpose of the challenge in cross-examination, because effectively what one is saying is, you're saying that the claimant was so terrible at his job that what happened to him effectively can't have been discriminatory. And that's been what a lot of these factual issues are about. In our submissions, we're going to be focused on putting our case about what did happen rather than on meeting that case from the bank. Now, the reason I mention that is that what I don't want said, if we do not go through Mr. Law's emails over 10 pages of written submissions, I don't want Your Honour to think that this means that we're sort of giving up on that issue, because we're saying it's not the correct way to look at it. That's what we're saying. Effectively, we're saying that is a not material to the issues before the court.
Well, again, and I'll hear from Mr. City in a minute, but I think, again, it is this, and this talk about alternative explanations is, I think, helpful, although not in a situation, unlike England, this is not a situation where the burden of proof has been flipped, and that, I think, is of some considerable significance. But the issue really, I think, is that the bank's case, as I understand it, and no doubt Mr. City will tell me if I'm wrong, is that there is an alternative explanation for the way in which Mr. Mahood was treated, and it's got nothing to do with race.
Yeah.
And so that's why the bank has put on that evidence. What I guess I'm saying is that we may not even get to that point, because the first step in the process, a la the English model, is for you to make out your prima facie case.
Yeah.
So I'm just saying that's why I think the focus ought to be upon that first step, and reams and reams of material about whether it was Mr. Law or who was being rude or Mr. Mahmood was being rude is not going to be terribly useful, because I can read the emails.
I agree with
can
that.
form my own view.
And Your Honour, I'm grateful for that indications, because it saves time, quite aside from anything else.
Yes.
But what we're going to be doing, as we've done for example, in the opening, is just to focus on what our case is. So that's what we're going to be doing.
Mr. Setty's been very patient.
Now given the floor.
Yes. So, yes, Mr. Setty.
That's a very helpful indication that Your Lordship has, Your Honour has given this morning, because it's exactly our position. We think that is the way in which that is what the claim is about, and that's how the claim needs to be determined. Just one point, my learned friend raised the English position of the shifting burden of proof, but what is important, just at this stage for me to just flag, is that even in England, before the burden can even be thought about being shifted, the claimant must have raised on the evidence a prima facie case upon which the court, without looking to the defendant for an explanation, upon which the court can adversely infer unlawful discrimination. So in other words, you only look to the burden shifting. The burden only ever does shift if, without it shifting, the claimant has made out a prima facie case. And that's an important observation, because in many respects the position, we say we haven't reached that point, but that'll be right for closing.
Good. All right. Well, thank you. I hope that's been helpful. Unless there's anything else, we'll adjourn now until we'll reconvene again on the 1st of May, after which I will have received the enormous benefit of your chronology, and I'm sure the equally enormous benefit of your written submissions.
I'm grateful to Your Honour and to the court staff, and could I particularly extend our thanks for the occasions that we sat late, because that is why we have got where we are, and I'm very grateful.
And a special thanks for the lecterns.
Yes, that's good. Great. All right, well, thank you, everybody. Safe travels to wherever you're returning to, and call now adjourned.